p.m. in Dakar, 7 o'clock in Cotonou. Good evening and many thanks for staying tuned to West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting on 94.9 FM and online at wadr.org. Welcome to Newslink. Here are the top stories. On the occasion of Eid Mubarak, Senegalese President Diomaye Faye calls for peace and national cohesion.
On
this sacred day, I invite every citizen to cultivate a spirit of solidarity, listening, and surpassing oneself.
Nigeria's Drug Enforcement Agency announces several arrests and seizures of illicit substances across the country. In Benin, the Republican police faces criticism for acts of violence and abuse of civilians.
The
designation of officers to carry out missions must take into account their actual capacities and also their profiles. The police, for the most part, still do the work on the ground, but that's no reason for blunders to occur.
And Chadian President Deby Itno threatens legal actions against all forms of corruption. Please stay tuned for details of these stories and more.
Here is Augustine Coley with Newslink.
Many thanks for joining our holiday broadcast and welcome to our listeners within the sub-region and beyond. We begin with a number of stories concerning the Eid Mubarak holiday, commonly known as the Korite, that has been observed today by a large part of the Muslim community across the world. On the occasion of this day, Senegalese head of state, President Bassirou Diomaye Faye, prayed at the Grand Mosque of Dakar and called for peace and national cohesion. The president said he remains determined to serve in humility and loyalty to meet the legitimate expectations of the Senegalese people. Here is President Diomaye Faye's speech.
On this sacred day, I invite every citizen to cultivate a spirit of solidarity, listening, and surpassing oneself. Senegal needs all these strengths to move forward in harmony. Let us continue to build a nation of peace, fraternity, and equity. As the President of the Republic, I would like to reiterate my commitment to remaining attentive to our people and to serving with loyalty, rigor, but above all, humility, to meet the legitimate expectations of the Senegalese people. The future we build together must live up to the sacrifices and the hope of our fellow citizens.
Senegalese head of state Bassirou Diomaye Faye. Similarly, in Nigeria, President Bola Tinubu has urged the Muslims and all Nigerians to uphold the values of kindness, clarity, and selflessness practiced through Ramadan. Speaking at the Eid Mubarak Grand Prayer in Abuja, he emphasized the need to extend a spirit of compassion and community services beyond the holy month. Tinubu expressed gratitude for completing the fasting period in good health and called on citizens to continue supporting the vulnerable and less privileged people in society.
We should give thanks to Almighty Allah. We saw the beginning, we started together, and we are ending together in good health and in happiness. In prayers for our country, for all our people. We should continue the good deed as taught by the holy month of Ramadan. Care for the vulnerable, the orphans, the less privileged, everything that we have observed. We should not revert to the path that is not acceptable with the teaching of this month. That's what I pray for.
Nigerian President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. Still on the celebration of Eid Mubarak, Ghana's President John Dramani Mahama has challenged young people to be change makers in the country rather than becoming a tool for destruction. Joining the National Chief Imam for the National Eid Mubarak prayers today, President Mahama passionately called on the Muslim communities in Baku, in the north of the country, to give peace a chance to reign. Here is President Mahama's speech.
The spirit of sacrifice, discipline, and compassion you have demonstrated during the holy month of Ramadan embodies the values we all strive for in building a prosperous and just country. Today is a day of joy, thanksgiving, and renewal of faith. It also reminds us of the values that define us as a people. Faith, sacrifice, unity, and compassion are what we need. Ramadan is more than just abstaining from food and drink. It is a time for deep spiritual reflection. It is a time for self-discipline, and it is a time for kindness towards others. My brothers and sisters, let us work together, guided by the principles of faith, justice, and compassion, to create a brighter future for ourselves and future generations. May Allah bless our nation and guide us on the path of peace and prosperity. And on this day, I want to take the opportunity once again to call on our brothers and sisters in Boko to give peace a chance. On this holy occasion, where we celebrate the feast of Eid al-Fitr after the holy month of Ramadan, my brothers and sisters in Boko, let us give peace a chance.
President John Dramani Mahama of Ghana.
More stories coming up on West Africa Democracy Radio. Newslink continues.
Now, away from matters of the Eid celebration, the Ghanaian Navy has alerted ECOWAS maritime security authorities following a suspected pirate attack on the Ghanaian registered fishing vessel, which left 3 crew members missing. The Ghana Navy has launched a full-scale investigation into the incident, which occurred in the country's territorial waters on March 27. WADR's Nadia Diditi reports.
According to a Ghana Navy statement, 7 armed attackers boarded the vessel around 17:53 hours on the 27th of March, firing shots and seizing crew members' mobile phones. After 3 hours, they left, only for the remaining crew to discover that the captain, chief mate, and chief engineer, all Chinese nationals, were missing, suspected to have been kidnapped. Authorities have engaged the ECOWAS Multinational Maritime Coordination Center, MMCC, Zone F in Accra, a key part of the Yaoundé Architecture for Maritime Security, to coordinate a regional response. Intelligence agencies are actively working to locate and safely rescue the missing crew members. Meanwhile, the Ghana Navy, Marine Police, and Naval Intelligence personnel have interrogated the crew and gathered evidence from the vessel, which is now docked safely at the Tema Fishing Harbour. The Navy has vowed to intensify maritime security operations, ensuring the safety of Ghana's waters and preventing future attacks. For WADR, Nadia Diditi, Accra.
Let's travel to Benin, where for several months the Republican police have been facing heavy criticisms due to acts of violence and abuse perpetrated against the population. Arrests, often described as arbitrary torture, and loss of human lives are becoming common. While voices have been raised to denounce the phenomena, authorities at the highest levels are trying to reassure the citizens. Let's take a look at all of this in this report from our correspondent in Cotonou, Adzi Adam Sule, voiced by Francis Boniface.
Since the reform that led to the measure of the National Police and the former gendarmerie to finally create the Republican Police, cases of police misconduct in Benin have become a major concern. One of the recent cases was the death last November of a young man named Orogani Samba Fisal after being arrested by the police. According to witnesses, he died after being subjected to police misconduct. According to some people we met in Benin's economic capital, Cotonou, the damage runs deep. They also denounce police actions on the ground. Professor Jean Nazé Tama, a lawyer and specialist in public law, issues a solemn warning to the Beninese authorities. He reiterated that the primary mission of the security forces is to ensure the protection of citizens and thus transform themselves into, and I quote, an instrument of blind repression, end of quote.
The designation of officers to carry out missions must take into account their actual capacities and also their profiles. The police, for the most part, still do the work on the ground, but that's no reason for blunders to occur. alone. Those responsible for these blunders will be held accountable. Beyond that, we've decided to also focus on sanctions. That is, from now on, an officer found guilty of the death of an honest citizen must be held accountable. This is without taking into account the criminal sentence that will be handed down by the judge. They will be brought to justice.
In November 2024, the Beninese government appeared to be taking action on the phenomenon. This was the case for Alassane Seydou, Beninese Minister of the Interior and Public Security. During this meeting, a diagnosis was also made to find ways and means to prevent future cases of police misconduct.
Francis Boniface with the details of Aziz Adam Suled's report from Cotonou. Crossing over to the Central Sahel, particularly in Burkina Faso, the transitional government has granted amnesty to 21 soldiers involved in the failed coup d'etat of September 2015. A decree signed by the head of state, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, on March 24, formalized the decision following the passage of an amnesty bill by the Transitional Legislative Assembly in December 2024. HATC reports.
The Burkinabe government has issued a decree granting amnesty to 21 members of the armed forces convicted or prosecuted for their roles in the September 2015 coup attempt. The decision comes after the adoption of a bill on December 18, 2024, later approved by the Transitional Legislative Assembly with overwhelming support, recording 67 votes in favor out of 70. The coup, orchestrated by soldiers from the disbanded Presidential Security Regiment (RSP), saw the detention of Transitional President Michel Kafando and Prime Minister Isaac Zida under the leadership of General Gilbert Diendere. The pushes attempted to dissolve the government and establish a National Council for Democracy, but their efforts collapsed within days due to mass protests and military opposition. The RSP was subsequently dismantled and key figures, including Diendere, were arrested. Following a trial that began in 2018, Diendere was sentenced in 2019 to 20 years in prison for crimes including attacks on state security and murder, while former Foreign Minister Djibril Bazole received a 10-year sentence. Other military and civilian participants face various prison terms. The amnesty decree also lifts disciplinary sanctions imposed on the pardoned soldiers but bars them from reclaiming lost ranks or receiving compensation. While the government presents the move as a step toward national reconciliation, critics argue it undermines accountability. The decision adds another layer to Burkina Faso's complex political landscape as the country navigates ongoing security and governance challenges.
HATC reporting there. From Burkina Faso, we head to Guinea, where reactions are trailing the pardon granted to Musa Dadis Camara, who was sentenced to 20 years in prison for crimes against humanity linked to the September 28, 2009 stadium massacre. Human Rights Watch described President Mamadi Doumbouya's decision as a shock, especially as Camara's appeal is still ongoing. Camara was pardoned for health reasons and has been released from prison. Here is a spokesman for the Guinean human rights organization, Al-Senegal.
C'est une décision qui pour nous a été une surprise générale pour les organisations des partis civils.
This is a decision that for us as civil party organizations came as a general surprise. It violates the dignity and honor of the victims and does not even respect the most basic principles of the proper administration of justice. In this case, given that, as you know, a presidential pardon normally comes after a final decision. However, in this case, at the end of the first phase of the trial, on July 31, 2024, after the convictions, there were appeals. It would be very difficult for us to explain the motivations behind this decision. What we can see is that this is a political decision, not only one that undermines the dignity and honor of the victim, but also one that calls into question Guinea's own efforts to fight impunity and ensure the proper administration of justice. We have the impression that today the protection of human rights is no longer a priority for this group. As you know, in Africa, the voices are mostly communitarian, and that it still has influence in the forest region. That could be one hypothesis, but we can't explain it. What we can see is that the young woman is undermining the efforts she herself put forward in the fight against impunity, and that's a great shame.
Alcine Insal is the spokesperson for the Guinean Human Rights Organization. You are listening to Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting from Dakar, Senegal. Here is a reminder of our top stories. On the occasion of Eid Mubarak, Senegalese President Diomaye Faye calls for peace and national cohesion. In Benin, the Republican police faces criticism for acts of violence and abuse of civilians. Still ahead in the news, Nigeria's Drug Enforcement Agency announces several arrests and seizures of illicit substances across the country. And Chadian President Debi Itno threatens legal actions against all forms of corruption. We also have guest interview and a sports update. Please stay with us.
Africa Democracy Radio. It's you speaking.
Many thanks for being there with us. The Nigeria Drug Law Enforcement Agency conducted large-scale operations that resulted in significant arrests and seizures of tons of illicit substances across the country. This announcement was made Sunday by the National Drug Law Enforcement Agency, stating that these operations aim to dismantle criminal networks and reduce the supply and demand for drugs across the country. Usma Umar has the details in this report.
According to the Nigerian Drugs Law Enforcement Agency, NDLEA statement, among those arrested were powerful businessmen. They include Aroko Dari Damil Ebenezer, a Lekki businessman who was arrested while waiting for a 32.24 kilogram shipment of cannabis from the United States. Another businessman, Omorui Terry, who was arrested at the Murtala Mohammed International Airport in Lagos while attempting to export 1,400 tramadol pills to Italy. In addition to these operations, the Nigerian Drug Law Enforcement Agency also conducted field operations, including in Katsina, where 684 blocks of compressed cannabis and 86,000 diazepam pills were seized. In Edo State, more than 13,198 kilograms of cannabis were destroyed and 158 kilograms were recovered for prosecution. These destructions follow the discovery of plantations in forests such as Ohen and Sobi. Additional seizures took place in other parts of the country, including Enugu, Kwara, Oyo, and Niger states. Following these exploits across the country, the NDLEA boss, General Mohammed Buba Marwa, retired, commended his officers for their hard work and expressed his hope that Nigeria would become a safer and drug-free society. He called on them to work harder to eradicate the scourge in the country. For Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, Usman Umar reporting from Abuja.
Now, away from the West African sub-region, the President of the Republic of Chad, Mahamat Idris Deby Itno, took the occasion of the celebration of Eid Mubarak to send a message to members of the Supreme Council for Islamic Affairs and encourage the citizens to unite in respect of Republican principles. In his speech, Deby Itno highlighted the challenges of the Fifth Republic and the need to establish a new political and social order based on integrity and justice. He stressed the need for the Fifth Republic to break with the practices that tarnish the country's image both nationally and internationally. Details with Christopher Atijo.
The Chadian head of state particularly warned against corruption, calling for zero tolerance for the misappropriation of public resources. He warned that those who wish to improve Chad's prosperity through the exploitation of public resources must know that they will oppose the fight against oppression and that the laws of the republic have neither compassion nor pity. The president urged institutions and the government to take strict measures to eradicate all forms of corruption with all necessary force and determination wherever it exists. Addressing religious leaders and the Muslim communities, Mahatma Idris Deby Itno emphasized their role in national unity and the preservation of moral values. He urged the faithful to avoid doctrinal disputes and strengthen brotherhood among themselves, citing the country's Christians as an example, who, despite their doctrinal differences, practice their faith in peace and mutual respect. Mahatma Idris Deby Itno also denounced certain practices harmful to the Chadian society, particularly the failure to respect ethical and religious values, and pointed to the malicious behavior of certain individuals who exploit the country's economy and wealth without moral consideration. Finally, he called for a more collective commitment to building a stronger and more virtuous Chad.
Christopher, a teacher, reporting there.
Politics Analyses on major news, social matters, and all. This is A Guest.
Let's take you back to the Republic of Guinea, where the presidential pardon granted to Musa Dadis Camara, initially sentenced to 20 years in prison for crimes against humanity linked to the September 28, 2009 massacre, has sparked strong reactions in the country and beyond. Human Rights Watch described President Mamadi Doumbouya's decision as a shock, especially as Camara's appeal is still ongoing. Our guest is the spokesperson for the Guinean human rights organization Al-Senin Sal.
Écoutez, c'est une décision qui pour nous a été une surprise générale pour les organisations des partis civils.
This is a decision that for us as civil party organizations came as a general surprise. It violates the dignity and honor of the victims and does not even respect the most basic principles of the proper administration of justice. In this case, given that, as you know, a presidential pardon normally comes after a final decision. However, in this case, at the end of the first phase of the trial, on July 31, 2024, after the convictions, there were appeals.
D'ailleurs, qui intervient 48 heures après un décret qui parlait d'indemnisation pour les victimes.
In the presidential pardon granted to Captain Musa Dadis Camara, some see it as a decision to gain the sympathy of the Forest Guinea, a region blessed with the Dadis Camara genetic, which is nevertheless a major electoral stronghold while presidential ambitions are attributed to General Mamadi Doumbouya. What do you think about it?
Il serait très difficile pour nous d'expliquer les motivations qui sont derrière ça.
It would be very difficult for us to explain the motivations behind this decision. What we can see is that this is a political decision, not only one that undermines the dignity and honor of the victim, but also one that calls into question Guinea's own efforts to fight impunity and ensure the proper administration of justice. We have the impression that today the protection of human rights is no longer a priority for this group. As you know, in Africa, the voices are mostly communitarian, and that it still has influence in the forest region. That could be one hypothesis, but we can't explain it. What we can see is that the young woman is undermining the efforts she herself put forward in the fight against impunity, and that's a great shame.
Dans le cadre de la lutte contre l'impunité, et c'est très dommage.
Are you concerned that the presidential pardon decision will extend to other convicts in the trial of the September 28, 2009 massacre, who were the main defendants, including the former aide-de-camp of Captain Musa Dadis Camara, Commander Abubakar Jakite, alias Tumba Jakite?
Aujourd'hui, je pense qu'il ne faut pas exclure cette hypothèse. Si les gens ne sont
Today, I think we shouldn't rule out this possibility. If people are no longer committed to delivering justice, Dadis is the main accused in this case. He was the president of the republic. How can you pardon Dadis when he has been convicted and leave the others to you? How can we hold a trial without Dadis in this case? Can you imagine the problems that would create for the rest of the legal proceedings? We wonder how this trial can continue now. We still hope that the International Criminal Court, as you recall, on the day the trial opened, September 28, 2022, announced the closure of the initial investigations it had opened and signed a memorandum with Guinea in which Guinea committed to delivering justice in this case. Failing that, the court could still return to the case, at least to expand the file, and there are provisions in the Rome Statute that allow the court to return to the case and reopen the case. Today, this is a possibility that must be considered before Guinea is abandoning the path it had committed itself to in order to deliver justice in this case.
Le chemin sur lequel il s'était engagé à rendre justice dans ce dossier.
With this pardon granted to Dadis Camara, what is the biggest fear for the victims and their families today? As a reminder, some testified against him during the trial in the open.
Ça renforce notamment le climat d'insécurité.
You shouldn't know that the majority of those directly involved in the events of September 28 are still at large. And given the influence Dadis now has at the community level, and he has the support of the agency, this obviously reinforces the climate of insecurity for the victims. And besides, today, if we talk about an appeal trial, we even wonder, will we even have victims who will have the courage to come and testify at the hearing, there is this question of security that in any case comes up again. I think that the victims and we are no longer safe.
Alcine Sal is the spokesperson for the Guinean Human Rights Organization. Now, in the world of sports, defending champions Senegal get their Total Energies CAF Honor 17 Africa Cup of Nations Morocco 2025 campaign on the way with a group clash against Gambia at the Ben Mhalid El Abdi Stadium in El Jadida on Tuesday. This is the first meeting between neighbors and rivals Senegal and Gambia at the Total Energy CAF Honor 17 AFCON. Both teams have won the title previously. Senegal are the defending champions, while Gambia are 2 times champions, having won in 2005 at home and in 2009 when Algeria were hosting. Senegal are winless in open play against West African rivals at the finals. They have played Burkina Faso twice at the group stages, first in 2011 and a game they lost 3-2. They did defeat Burkina Faso on penalties in the 2023 semi-finals after the game ended 1 apiece. They also lost 2-1 to Guinea in the group stages in 2019. Gambia meeting a West African nation for the 9th time at the finals. Their record against fellow Wafu rivals at the finals reads: they played 8 games, won 4, drew 0 and lost 4. Senegal will become the 8th different West African team that Gambia will face at the finals. They have only faced Ghana more than once, meeting them at the group stages and the finals in 2005. With that, we've come to the end of this edition of Newslink on West Africa, the Democracy Radio, broadcasting from Dakar, Senegal. Thank you for listening, and many thanks to Maudo Juf and to Shekinjai for the technical support. Do interact with us via our social media platforms, X, Instagram at WADR News, and on Facebook, WADR English Service. I am Augustine Cully. Good evening.
And many thanks to you for listening.